All right. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. Good morning to those of you on the West Coast. I'm your host, Brandon Troy, host and co creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited, and I'm joined by.
Jerome Bourgeois, co-creator, co-founder, Movers and Shakers Unlimited, man. How's everything?
What's
Back
up?
from
What's up?
Vegas already. How much money
Yes,
you
yeah.
win, man?
Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
Where's my cut,
But
man? Where's my cut, brother?
welcome to this episode of This Week in Review. As you know, This Week in Review, we do every Saturday to talk about the news bits that have made the rounds in the entertainment industry. As you will know, we know that you guys are busy, with the goings on that are happening out in the world, obviously, and it can be very easy to miss a lot of the things that happen over the course of the week. So we are here as your resource to help you with that. Now, just a couple of minutes just to let you know that even if you aren't checking us out live, if you are checking us out live, thank you so much. But if not, and you're catching it as an archive episode, that you can keep track of the conversation with TWnRMNSU. So that's This Week in Review, Movers and Shakers Unlimited. Also make note of the lowercase in there is very specific to that hashtag that we use. But yes, you can keep track of the conversation that way. And also, if you enjoy much of the content that we do here at Movers and Shakers Unlimited, you can also be a Patreon supporter with us as well. So you can check out the link just down below that you're seeing just below there. And with that being said, as always, want to give a shout out to Jerome Bourgeois, who is a Patreon supporter of ours.
Shout out, sis.
Knew it was coming. There you go. There you go. Thank you. Shout out, sis.
I have to, man.
Absolutely. But with that being said, Jerome, let's hop right into the stories that we're going to be discussing this week. And for whatever reason, this week, a lot of what our stories are very Netflix centric.
The Netflix and chill edition,
right? So the first story that we wanted to hop into that was shared this week is the raising of the cost for Netflix. So in a story out of Deadline, it was shared that currently there will be a raise in the prices that we have for Netflix. And to be more specific, for those that are paying, $13.99 a month, is actually going to raise to $15.49 in the US. And for those that are, enjoying the service in Canada, for the standard rate, it's going to go from $16.49 it's going to go up to $16.49, from $14.99. Now, Jerome, you hear this news of, this raise in cost by, $1 and some change. And, what are your thoughts on it? I mean, there are some reasons that they specify for us in this story, but still, I'll punt it over to you. What are your thoughts?
But yeah, and thanks for joining us for episode 46. New year, new beginnings, and we got to start off with this Netflix story because a lot of big things happening. But anyway, I thought it was. I mean, it's inevitable because as Netflix gets more and more popular, and they've been dominating the market share in streaming for such a long time. After a while, their growth. I mean, obviously plateaued in North America, as you can see, but they've been growing globally. So, they have to keep up with if they want to keep up with the type of quality that they're producing when it comes to all this content, these movies, these TV shows, these docuseries, acquiring documentaries, acquiring movies, acquiring, whatever, even some short films. I remember they had that Oscar-winning short film on there. But yeah, I mean, the only one I was really looking at is the low tier one, because I still have the. I remember paying $7.99, and then now then went up to like $8.99, and then now it's not. I guess it'll be $9.99, and you got to pay taxes. So I mean, everyone's trying to get in on that. That tax thing was interesting because that had to do with the states, certain states at least. At least I live in Maryland. They started charging tax on like digital subscriptions. I mean, I get it. They want to get some of the revenue. It's not the end of the world. But people are going to see an uptick in their expenses, and in addition to inflation going on, which is like around last time I checked, it was like 6%, and some people are saying 7%. I mean, obviously people are going to make different choices to what they want to pay for when it comes to entertainment, but I still think Netflix is still at a pretty good price point I mean, the only ones that really like I think can compete sort of. Obviously, I would say Disney Plus because they're a little bit cheaper. They raised their price a little bit, and obviously you have Apple TV, but the amount of content that Netflix has, like I get, like they can also do this, because of their popularity. But what I thought was really most interesting about this article is how like we were talking about this on I think the last episode, with HBO Max reaching 73.8 million, I think last year. Yes, even according to this article, I think that's the amount. They said in this article, according to Deadline, 73.8 million for Warner's HBO Max. That's what they ended in 2021. I mean, that's not that far from what Netflix has in the total amount of subscribers in North America, which is it says 74 million. But overall, globally, Netflix has 214 million subscribers. So you see, where everyone else is trying to get to compared to what Netflix is doing, and it makes sense. But just in the North American market, you saw how much ground HBO Max has taken over just based on releasing all those big, Hollywood blockbusters and just branded, content, IP that people already know. So, I mean, hey, if this is what Netflix has to do in the meanwhile to just continue financing some of these huge, bigger quality, larger quality, projects that maybe also other studios pass on, which when we get into our next stories, we're going to talk further about.
Indeed.
I guess, that's just that's just part of the game, but it's just interesting. It's just interesting to see that. I mean, obviously, I feel like, this is going to happen. I mean, this is the landscape we're in. So, I mean, in order to continue operating at this, with this model for streaming content, they have to generate revenue. And if they're not growing as much in a certain market, whatever, eventually they're going to have to increase their price point. It's just going to be interesting to see as this happens, who's going to be the number 2 streamer that's going to catch up to Netflix, or it's going to be neck and neck, because it looks like obviously HBO Max, at least domestically or in North America, they're the number 2. I mean, they're the ones who are taking up that ground. But I don't know, but also you got to remember HBO Max also changed their price point too. They have a cheaper version that has ads, and that was different because HBO Max is pretty stingy. I mean, I get why, because they were like the OGs in premium content, and like they're like, they're like, hey, this is you guys want to watch what we have on HBO, and I'll be honest, like pretty much everything on HBO Max, even if you don't like it, it's really high quality stuff. So Netflix, I think, has gotten up there with certain things, but they're still, I think, trying to match the level of quality that maybe like HBO was putting out for like I'd say for maybe some of the movies or their shows, specifically some of their shows, which I think they are pretty much up there. But when it comes to original shows, I think still they're trying to get I guess be able to compete at that level. I think where Netflix is pretty strong or has the best type of shows, at least just my opinion, but is the limited series. I feel like they mastered that. Like when it comes to limited like narrative stories or docuseries, I feel like they mastered that. So they have to keep up with the pace. But it's inevitable. I mean, it's a business. They have to make money. So, and this is the only way they make money from subscribers. It's not like they have ads though. I mean, there might be some other small revenue streams, but primarily they're making their money from the streaming service. I mean, subscription. So charging people subscription fees. But
no, I hear you. I guess.
What do you think?
I mean, there were a couple of things that were very interesting about the story, and as Jerome teased already, there will be components of it that will make more sense as we head into some of the other stories that we'll be talking about. But I guess, and they specified in the story too, is just that idea that I'll start first by saying in the story, it tells us that the company is in the cash flow positive, which is interesting because, I know for quite a while, if I recall, there was a time where Netflix was borrowing a lot of money to, keep up the cost of a lot of their shows and a lot of their series because they were just trying to create as much content as possible. So it looks like now they're on the other side of it where they actually are, not at that point where they are, borrowing as much and not, breaking even, that they are, generating a profit. So that component of it, was, interesting to see. However, with some of the with that same, mission or that same drive to do, far more content, with that obviously comes costs. Like, even in the story, they tell us that, they're expected to spend, well over $17 billion. So, that money has to come from somewhere. So, and
it keeps going
way,
up, and I love that.
that money has to come from somewhere. So, that means that everything needs to go up, as a result, whether you're paying the actors, whether you're paying your creatives. I know a lot of times on, in stories that we've had on the show, we've talked about how a lot of streaming services are, paying multi, 8-figure, 9-figure deals for a lot of their creatives. So that way they can continue to generate content for them in the, in the thinking ahead and thinking of, long term of content being created for them. So those people have to get paid somehow. And one of the ways that you could do that is by raising the cost of the service. So, those are my thoughts on it. Jerome, did you have anything else to add before we move on to our next story?
And also, I think it's because they've already set the precedent that Netflix is willing to spend more money than a lot of these traditional media companies, because this is their only source of, like I said, primarily, not to my knowledge that there's any, there might be some other small revenue sources, but primarily they're making money from subscriptions. It's not like, you got to remember, what does Amazon do? Amazon is consumer discretionary. I mean, you're purchasing stuff on there to order. Everyone's ordering stuff on Amazon, and now they got to other markets. Amazon Prime, you know what Amazon Prime is primarily? It's primarily to market the business, because they've even said that. There were some articles talking about how, like, they acquired a whole bunch of other movies and they didn't do as well. Some of them did well, but like, Amazon's not making the majority of their money from Amazon Prime. I mean, it's just a fact. So they have other sources of revenue. You look at Disney. I mean, Disney is definitely content heavy, of course, but they have theme parks, they have merchandise, they have, they own they own ESPN, Hulu, majority of Hulu. I mean, they have a lot, sports. There's a lot of other revenue streams besides just Disney Plus. I mean, of course, the movies at the box office, all those Marvel movies, Star Wars. So they're building Disney Plus. Disney Plus is also is definitely a threat to Netflix, but that's, like I said, that's not their primary revenue source, even though that's definitely helping them transition into this new market that we're dealing with. Obviously, I would never say post-pandemic. I still say extended pandemic situation. And then you look at like NBC and these other traditional, there's Peacock, there's what else? There's Paramount Plus. All these other ones, those traditional companies, a lot of their revenue is derived from advertising on these television networks. And then if it was network television or cable television, and then finally now they got into streaming, and they're seeing that those revenues are decreasing, so they had to make that pivot. But like I said, there's still other sources of revenue that they can continue to operate on, as opposed to, like I said, Netflix is hard. Like, they specifically built their their revenue model based on how many subscribers they have, and that's why you see them going so hard when it comes to developing new content and acquiring new content. And then also, like I said, spending. I think what's key though is like spending outbidding companies that wouldn't spend the amount of money on some of these movies or shows. And I feel like if they're going to be consistent with that, that's why you see they're spending $17 billion, because they want to be like, yo, we're going to try and really make our own version of whatever big blockbuster franchise you might have at these other studios. And like I said, you're going to have to go to Netflix to watch this. And the only way to keep doing that is to keep spending a ridiculous amount of money every year. And if they're not getting it from new subscribers, they got to raise the price. So, and they're expanding internationally. I mean, they're really making inroads in like India and like all these other countries too. And there's a big market there. So Why do you think you see like there's so many Indian shows now on Netflix too? I was just like, yeah, the Indian Matchmaker. There's what is it? There's one called Decouple that was interesting. There's just a bunch. I'm just like, yeah, they're going hard, man. They're really trying to go hardcore into that market. So that's basically what I've been noticing. But yeah, it's gonna transition to our next story.
For sure. So the next story that we have, as I said, this is first couple of stories. Just brace yourselves. It is Netflix heavy. So
Netflix and chill.
the next story that we have that made the rounds this week is about a film that you guys saw over on Netflix, and that's Red Notice. So news came that there are plans to shoot back-to-back sequels to this heist actioner, if you will. Now, if you guys aren't familiar, with the film, and this is an exclusive out of Deadline. It was revealed after Universal initially, wavered, on the big budget of, this film, that Netflix stepped right in and, took on this actioner starring, the Dwayne The Rock Johnson. I can speak today. Dwayne The Rock Johnson, Gal Gadot, and Ryan Reynolds, and also including, of course, Rawson Marshall Thurber as well. Now, as I said, the plans are to do a back-to-back sequels for this film. Currently, according to the story, the plan is for production to start in 2023. But of course, it's all dependent on its stars. And as I named from each of those stars, they all, are busy with their own ventures with, other franchises as well. So, Jerome, you hear the news of, this film getting back-to-back sequels. And I know we were just talking about the Netflix story about them raising the prices on the service, and considering, the budget for the initial film was, in that ballpark, I understand, of like 200 million. And that was just the initial film. Now we're talking about the sequel, which, as we well know, with sequels, there's a tendency to get even, a larger budget. What are your thoughts on this news?
Well, it's probably, but also usually I think they're probably going to save money if they shoot it back to back. Because I mean, So I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they're spending like 400 million or whatever, a little bit more. But I mean, like I said, it's worth it for them because Red Notice was like their largest, highest viewed, movie, and I know Don't Look Up was like up there, had some records too. But like at least at that time, when Red Notice came out, it was like their biggest movie. I think it surpassed the one before that was I think Bird Box. I remember looking at that, and that was like the biggest thing. And like people were like, Bird Box with Sandra Bullock, and I was like, yeah, that's all right. This movie, I mean, Red Notice, I enjoyed it. That was a pretty good heist movie. I don't think it's like as amazing as like other heist movies, or as like I would really be curious. Like I said, this is a great example of if this came out in movie theaters, would it be as successful? And maybe internationally, this potentially is possible, but I'm not so sure that this would have done as well in theaters. But this is the changing times that we're in. You release something on Netflix, it's going to be it's global. It's like you have a global release simultaneously, and you can, based on their viewership. I mean, that kind of proves it, where it's like, wow, globally that many people were watching this. So to the point where they're like, they're confident. Netflix is confident in shooting two back-to-back sequels, and it ties into what I was saying earlier. Like, what does Disney have? Well, they already spent their money on their branded IP. They already have their original Disney lineup of characters. But what, they spent $4 billion to buy Lucasfilm, so they have all the Star Wars movies and characters. They spent about another $4 billion for Marvel, so they have all the Marvel characters. They spent, I forgot the amount on Pixar, but whatever. Pixar has all those properties. Disney, that's why Disney just dominated at theaters. I mean, they had all those big branded, properties, and they just kept cranking them out. And then obviously when the pandemic hit, they had to like regroup and build, really get Disney Plus off the ground. But that's what made Disney dominate so much, because they had these built-in fan bases with these franchises, and they were highly successful. People really wanted to watch it. Netflix, obviously, they don't rely on, they don't have, I mean, they do have some of their movies that might be in limited theaters, but they're not relying on that to make money. But if that's the case, they're not making, like I said, they're not making money from box office receipts, revenue. They have to try to make their version of that on Netflix, because you can't watch this movie anywhere else. You're only going to watch Red Notice on Netflix. So if they can make a franchise out of that and have several franchises that you have to go to Netflix to watch, that's a win for them. And, it costs money to get. I mean, if you want to get The Rock, you want to get Black Adam, Deadpool, and Wonder Woman in the same movie right now, it's going to cost you some money. And then in addition to that, I mean, they were spending the budget. That was filmed obviously in different locations. I mean, it's an action movie, big budget, big set pieces. They're going to spend the money. It's worth it for them, because, like I said, they can see that a lot of people that they're adding new subscribers either internationally, worldwide, and just retaining people. It's a win for them. And then, like I said, the only other time, I remember when this was kind of like a novel idea of doing this, even though I think it makes sense for certain franchises, but it still is a big risk. I mean, obviously they're referencing the Lord of the Rings, how they shot those back to back. I don't think it was much of a risk for the Avengers movies, because they've already proven themselves on those films before, but the last two they shot back to back. They're talking about the Hunger Games and Pirates of the Caribbean. And then obviously now with James Cameron's Avatar sequels. Oh yeah, that's another thing. Like, I mean, Disney's like has all of these movies in their arsenal ready to just release soon. I mean, Netflix has no choice to try to do this, have their own version of a big budget franchise to compete with, like I said, Disney Plus and HBO Max with this content. So what's going to be interesting is to see what other movies turn into these types of franchises. Because I don't recall. I mean, I don't know if maybe we have to look it up. I don't know if are they doing a Bird Box 2, or I don't know. Like, because that was, I don't know. Like, maybe of these other
films.
Not
that I'm aware of.
What?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, not that aware. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that just didn't work out for I don't know. Who knows? But it looks like the Russo brothers, I mean, they're doing, I think, an Extraction sequel, and they have other movies on the way with Netflix. I know they were talking about this. The movie that will probably exceed this one is The Gray Man. It's like a 007-esque global thriller that the Russo brothers directed for Netflix with Ryan Gosling and Chris Evans, according to this Deadline article. So it looks like, yeah, I mean, maybe if that does really well on Netflix, that might be a franchise. So, I mean, all I know is this just makes filmmakers who are trying, emerging and getting in the game to really look at like Netflix as a viable option. Of course, I mean, it's been that way for a few years now, but like, I feel like for big budget films, I mean, it's just now, like I said, you can't deny the power of Netflix. And like I said, even if you see like a movie that is getting rejected at the studio level from like a traditional media company like Universal or whatever, Paramount or Warner, that could have just been for, like I said, budgetary reasons or whatever. They just didn't believe in it or whatever reason, because of their traditional revenue structure, a revenue model. And when Netflix is just relying on their subscribers, that might not be the case. So that's why it's like they're picking up the slack where some of these other these movie ideas or films that maybe would have been acquired or developed and financed by one of these traditional media companies is actually, or that would have been passed on regardless of who's in it, is like, all right, Netflix, we got the dollars, we got the money, we're just going to do it because you guys are going to do it. And like, they can do it, they can back it up. And it's just really interesting seeing that. It's like giving filmmakers that extra option if you're up and coming and if you're established. Because like I said, this ties in also to The Irishman, because how everyone didn't want to make that film because it was too long. The budget was too high. Even though you had Martin Scorsese directing, you had Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci. I mean, all-star cast, but it doesn't matter. But Netflix is like, oh, I see opportunity. Yes, no one wants to make that. We'll do it, and we're going to put it on Netflix. Trade-off is you might not see it in theaters as long, even though it was in limited release. Whatever, it was made. So that's how
my takeaway from here, just to sum it up, is just the carryover from what we had in our last story of talking about the domino effect of how much we're paying for the streaming services, and if you have more streamers that are taking on these big behemoths of films in terms of their budgets, how that will reflect, trickle down to, those that are watching it. But another story or a component of it that they talk about that I want to, touch on, that I feel like is not getting enough credit, is just that idea of what has been happening, or I should say what we've had happen in the past, with just commenting further what's happened in the past with franchises and with major IPs when they do back-to-back sequels. And just as you were talking about, of it allowing you to still do multiple franchises without having to far exceed the cost that you would pay if you spread them out versus shooting them all together, and how trend-wise, how that will carry over into streamers going forward into the future, as more streamers potentially take on that type of format when they're doing their sequels. So as more sequels are being done with perhaps some of their, not even just films that that potentially start out with the studio, but maybe ones that just literally go right to the streamer themselves, and they just make the decision, hey, if we're going to do part 2, part 3, or part 4, we're going to use that same model that we would have if they're going to go into a theater. So that component of it, trend wise, just like what you would see if a film was going to the theater, will be very interesting going forward. Do you have any last thoughts before we get into our next story?
Yeah, I'll just say, like, I do remember back in the day. I mean, this is a while back. I remember talking to some, talking to some people in Hollywood, producers. It was more reality show people. And I remember this when streaming was just starting to like get off, and like people still were looking at it like, they almost like didn't. Some people, I remember some people just didn't respect it. They're like, I don't know how this is gonna work. It's like, it doesn't. Like the argument I kept hearing from people, I remember, was it doesn't really it's not able to you're not able to have the same type of budget based off of the money made from streaming. So like I remember when like a lot of people work for like a lot of these traditional media companies, they'd be like, oh yeah, no, you only can make those bigger budget things for like traditional cable networks or network television, because that's where really the money from advertising from those from that model actually was able to finance those bigger budget projects. And now we're clearly seeing that that's just not the case. And I just think the old way of thinking was just people just didn't like this idea of like, oh, now we're changing and that's not really the future. But it just shows it's like, things are just definitely changing, and they pretty much has become the standard now, where you have to think that way. And I mean, like I said, the only downfall, I mean, like I said, it's not the end of the world, but like for someone, as a filmmaker, is just liking the idea of still the theatrical experience. I'm not saying it's gonna die, but it's not becoming as, I mean, it's not as relevant for all of these, for every movie anymore. I mean, it's like only specific movies I feel like it's gonna be relevant for. But I mean, you spend $200 million on a movie that's not really going to be seen in theaters. It's just like something you would never think about back in the day, because like TV movies that like straight to DVD movies, or movies that were just released on certain maybe they were international, and then you didn't really see them in America. That was always, a lot of times that was like looked down upon, like, oh, that's like a straight to DVD movie, or that's a VOD movie, or that's a B movie, whatever. They couldn't get it in theaters. Now it's like, I mean, you can't really tell. Really, it's the quality of the film has nothing to do with like if it's going to be on Netflix or in theaters. It's like, is it just good quality? Did they spend the money and the time and the effort getting the right people to make it? And like, is it just a quality movie? Because like, I mean, this movie could be shown in theaters, but like, that's just not how the model works with Netflix. So, but it does make me wonder, like, how well would Red Notice do in theaters domestically as opposed to probably like I really think internationally this movie probably would have done really well. I don't know about domestically, but I bet I'm willing to put money. I'm willing to bet that if this was released theatrically first, it would have made most of its money like internationally, and then later on. But hey, as long as Netflix is seeing its metrics of like this is in the top 10 or is the top viewed one, they know that it's something people want to watch. So they're gonna keep they'll keep making movies like this. And this goes to our next story.
For sure, for sure. So, in our next story that we have is regarding the series Gentefied. Now, after 2 seasons, news made the rounds this week that the show will be getting the axe. The show followed the lives of three Mexican American cousins in Bull Heights who must tackle gentrification, borders, babies, and family separation, all while attempting to save their grandpa's taco shop. Now, it starred Carrie Martin, Annie Gonzalez. Now, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, Julissa Calderon and
Calderon.
Julissa Calderon, excuse me, and even Ferrer herself, who played on the show. So, if you're not familiar, America Ferrer produced the show. Now, in speaking, about this show, Jerome, I know we were just, last two stories we were talking about, what Netflix is doing in order to kind of expand, its tapestry, if you will, of series and shows that people can enjoy. And unfortunately, this show is getting the axe that has that component of giving shining light on a minority group that perhaps you don't always get a show on, and unfortunately it getting the axe. So what are your thoughts on it? It's been around for 2 seasons, and even according to the story that's here in Variety, it was a well-received show. I unfortunately haven't seen it. I still want to check it out, regardless of the fact that it is unfortunately getting the axe. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Brandon, like I thought this story was important. I mean, I know we're talking about it's Netflix heavy, there's a third story, but I just think this is important to bring to people's attention because, okay, so first of all, it's funny, like I never even heard this show. I didn't really hear much marketing or anything about it, but the genius of Netflix is obviously, I mean, depends on your viewing habits and what I'm viewing. Even if I have an eclectic taste and I'm watching a lot of different types of shows, just because you start watching one show, whatever, the algorithm will just be like, oh, check this show out. Check this show. You'll see that. And I just all of a sudden saw this at Gentefied. I was like, what is this? I was like, America Ferrari. Okay, it's about Mexican Americans. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was like, Latinos, American Latinos or Latinx. I say, but in a show about them, even though it's more Mexican perspective, I mean, it's better than other. I thought, I was like, hey, let me check this out. I actually watched. I kind of binged the first 2 seasons in a few days, and I was like, no, it's actually pretty good. And I think what was unique about the show is, I mean, there are some other, Latin American, I mean, either Mexican or Colombian or even a few American Latino or Latinx shows. But really, a lot of them are, I still like these shows. Like, I mean, we're both fans of Narcos.
Stereotypes, yeah, unfortunately, stereotypes.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's necessarily stereotype. It's just that it's focusing on that one aspect. And then that's fine. That's fine because those are interesting stories. But the thing is, you don't really see much else.
Agreed.
And I know that's been an issue. Obviously, that was a big issue. Obviously, in the African American community, and I feel like it's a lot better. And even though there still needs to be more progress in that area, and when it comes to Hispanics or Latinos, like there are very few shows and even movies. I mean, In the Heights was like one of the few Latinx films that came out and didn't do well because of HBO Max. Even though I thought it was pretty good. And there's still issues with that, like with representation, but whatever, at least it was something. I feel like this is one of the very few shows that Netflix invested in, or just in general, that you'll see with a primarily, American Latino Latinx cast. And it's sad to see that it's canceled. But I will say, like, I think it also brings up an important point that, like, it's very good. It's amazing that, like, you're having companies like Netflix or, I mean, some networks we're trying to expand their horizons and add more, add more content that's specifically focused on a certain demographic and a certain ethnicity or a certain culture. And I think, and they obviously are investing. Netflix is investing in other, projects too. Like they're doing stuff with, Sofia Vergara, and Jennifer Lopez, and also Netflix had the Selena, series. It was 2 seasons. That was really good. I enjoyed that. But I mean, that was a limited series. But I will say it's like it shows even if you get a deal and that's giving an opportunity to like maybe like a Mexican American story or just a American Latinx story,
people still have to watch it.
They need to watch the show. Like I mean, this got a second season and it got really good. I didn't even know it had 96% on the TWnRMNSU. I have to look at that. But the audience score of 76%. But it's showing like according to this article. It didn't appear in the Netflix top 10, and most of Netflix cancellations, it says, in renewals are driven by viewing, not by cost. So, if you really like one of these shows and you think it's giving you good representation, like people
watch it.
You have to watch it because it's the same with In the Heights. I remember it didn't do well in the box office, but there was a big push to be like, just stream it on HBO, show that there's a need for it, even if you're not the biggest fan of it. If companies like Netflix or any other studio doesn't see that there's an appetite for those types of stories, they're not gonna produce as many. And I think that is very important. People need to realize that. Now, like I said, I don't think that. I mean, that's also kind of not exactly the most fair metric because there's a lot of white stories with white characters that do bad, and they're still making tons of stuff with white people in it. That's not stopping, but it is what it is. Like with this type of progress in Hollywood and with these types of stories. I mean, it's sad to say that one show or one movie is like on the line representing everybody and for an opportunity, but it is like that for the most part. Like, you cannot deny the fact that like the reason when Crazy Rich Asians did really well in theaters, there's other Asian American based films that are getting made because of that movie. Like, you can't deny that. Like that, that's just a fact. And they're doing sequels to that film, but they came out like. Not only the Asian community, but like a lot, obviously that was a good movie. I enjoyed it, but like people came out to see that movie. It was profitable. It's the same with TV or, shows, even though like a lot of Hispanics, Latinx, I just say Latinos, Latina, they come out to watch like the Fast and Furious franchise and a lot of big movies too. So it's not like Latinos and Latinas are not going to movies or not watching stuff. They are. It's just, you got to also make something that they want to watch too. It's the same with the African American community. I think there was a statistic that like the African American community is like one of them. They go to the theaters. They'll rewatch films even more. Like they'll watch movies even more than like other demographics. But like I said, they gotta want to go see. They gotta want to watch something that they care about, that they actually want to see. And the same thing has to happen for other films and TV shows. So I just think it's something good to know. That's like, hey. It's good that we're making progress. It's good that these shows are being made. Even though I feel like, yeah, I mean, I would like to see more diverse Hispanic stories because, like, everything doesn't have to be Mexican. I mean, like, my family's from Venezuela and Trinidad. Like, we don't really have that much representation from that. But whatever. I'm still supporting because you don't really see that many, American Latino stories being made, period. But we have to support these shows just so that there could be other stories and being told, other shows being made, other movies being made. Like I said, you can look. That's why I applaud the African American community probably the most because look at the progress that's being made. Even though there still needs to be a lot more. You saw. I mean, there's no denying international. An international appetite for a big blockbuster that has a predominantly African American cast. You saw Black Panther. That broke any idea of like, oh. People don't want to see African Americans in a big action movie internationally. That's just a big lie. And that movie proved it. And there's tons of other movies that you're seeing that are getting made and shows, and it's like, people are watching them. You got to come out, and otherwise we're going to keep getting the same stereotypical stuff or the same specific stories, and it's not going to expand. And that's just the reality. But I just thought it's important to highlight that, and we also try to, we talk about entertainment stories and business stories, but also try to like focus on the diversity aspect and how we can, stories that are improving, the industry and representation, because I know that's a big thing for both of us. Cause there's some progress, but there's still a lot more that needs to be made. And like I said, not every community has been represented. has gotten a fair shot of it, or they've been represented, but not in the best ways. They haven't had enough diversity in the representation, and like I said, we've got a long ways to go in, especially the Latino community, the Asian community. I would say like the Desi community, Indian community, and the like the Caribbean community and Middle Eastern community, man, there's not that much representation or diverse representation at all. So I mean, and same with the Black community. I still think the African American community.
We still have a ways to go.
But I will say
there's been some progress.
I feel like there's been a little more progress there as opposed to the other ones, but it's still not enough. It's still a small percentage, especially if you want to go with the population in this country. I mean, I don't think it makes up not even close to 13% if you want to go by population. And then with the Latinx community, I mean, it's even higher than that. So I'm like, that's just why I brought this up. So I don't know if you got any other thoughts about it.
No, I mean, you summed up a lot of what I would have commented on. Just the idea of there are shows out there, but we need to make sure that there's shows out there. And don't get me wrong, like I love the show Narcos, and I mean it is based on true events, so you do have that component of it. But to have shows that are not just about things like drugs, but it's giving a far more rounded glimpse into different cultures and not just one component of it or one thing that can provide some assumption about a culture. So like to give different perspectives on it, which is why I love Fresh Prince, because it just thinking back on that iconic series. And I know we have a rebooted one that it's that's on its way.
Peacock, I think it's gonna come on Peacock.
Yeah. But just that show and showing whether it's the Fresh Prince, and other series like that show African Americans in a different light. They're not all all gangsters or drug dealers, to show people in successful walks of life, whether they are, judges or lawyers or what have you, that is something that is reflective of our society as well, not just one thing. That's all I'll say to kind of conclude that. But
you gotta watch the shows. You have to watch the shows.
You have to watch it.
You have to, even if you're just playing the movie on in the background. They need to see the numbers.
Exactly. Or else we're not going to get it.
You're not going to get more. They're going to be like in the end, it's all revolving around the color green and the numbers.
All right. So we'll get off the soapbox. But moving on to the next story. Over this week, there was news that dropped regarding Georgia and the fact that the film and tax credit jumped to 1.2 billion. Yes, that's with a B, billion, over 2021. So to talk further about that, and this is a story that came out of Variety. Yes, they doled out 1.2 billion in film and TV tax credits last year, surpassing those offered by any other state. It was 40% higher than the state's previous record, which was around 860 million. That was back in 2019. And another interesting component that we had in the story out of Variety is just the idea that the next in line, the next two largest states that provide these tax incentives are New York and California, which is kind of surprising because, with those states, they're very expensive. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but a lot of times when you have films that take place in these two states, you'll have, and this is a film term, but you'll have a lot of other states cheat as that area. So like, give me an example. A lot of times is thinking back of shows like House of Cards. Even though it took place in DC, a lot of times they would shoot in Baltimore. So like I would see a lot of these subways. I was like, that's not the subway. That's not the Metro. But maybe, when you're watching the show, you're feeling the same way. That's not the DC. That's why, because you have a lot.
Not from DC. You're probably
same thing with Avengers. Same thing with Avengers, because if I recall, and I'll confirm this, but if I recall, I believe they shot in Philadelphia to cheat as New York. When they were doing Avengers, and they for a lot of that
they used Toronto for a Hulk. I remember.
Yeah. So Jerome, you hear this news about all this money that was provided as tax incentives for film and TV in Atlanta. And what do you think?
No, I mean, it's not surprising. I mean, that's why you see, I mean, like what, The Walking Dead shoots there. I mean, Tyler Perry has his studios there. He actually he rents out some of his studios for The Walking Dead. You got a lot of movies getting shot there. A lot of these Marvel films. I mean, there's a reason why they're going there. You get the tax incentive. It's cutting down costs, and it's a win-win because I mean, you're getting, you're bringing a lot of jobs, and even if it's temporary jobs, and long-term jobs, and also it's helping the small businesses around there because they're getting a lot of economic activity from the movie shooting there. So it doesn't surprise me that they have they're giving out the best tax credits, and that's why you're continuing to see this happen. But I'm just surprised that not completely surprised, but I'm surprised that New York and California have, or these other states that could give out similar tax credits haven't replicated the same model, because then they could be more competitive. And I think specifically, I was reading an article in Variety before that California specifically was allocating more money for tax credits so they could bring productions back to LA and to California in general, because that was a big issue. A lot of these movies weren't being shot in LA like they used to be, or and I don't blame the producers or people trying to find a place to save money, because I mean, you need to keep your costs down as low as possible so you can turn a profit when you sell the film. I mean, this is a very high risk business with that's expensive. But yeah, I mean, I remember New York had some really good tax credits and incentives, so I'm surprised that they probably have been a little more consistent. But I know also Michigan and Florida, they had some incentives, and even Baltimore to a certain extent. I remember, and talking about doubling, I was extra in Head of State, and I remember they were like, "Yeah, we're gonna shoot in Baltimore to double Chicago," and I'm like, "Okay, I guess it was mainly the interiors though," and they used the station. So it's funny. I wonder if anyone from Chicago is probably like, "Hey, wait, that's not Chicago train station," but I mean, that's what happens. I mean, it's like a lot of times exteriors at least will be shot in certain, cities to get that look, for the most part, not always. And then the interiors they'll shoot in like a studio in LA or wherever else they want to shoot. But the fact that like Atlanta and just Georgia in general, and then New Mexico, it's another place, a big place they shoot a lot of films too, for their interiors, or there's, or some of the exteriors.
Well, here's another big place.
They'll do that because of the tax credit.
Prague is a big place that a lot of people shoot.
Well, yeah, it used to be before, because that also not just tax credits, just because of the labor was cheaper too. So now it really depends on that. So I mean, also in Canada, they shoot a lot of stuff in Toronto.
I mean, Vancouver. Like Blade 2 was shot
in Prague.
In Prague, and I mean, and they even talk about it in the film. Like I'm a huge geek when it comes to like listening to like the commentary and them talking about all the stuff that they had to go through to make the film work, and them talking about how much it would have cost if they shot it, in LA versus, shooting it.
Well, that's why they do it.
I know. I'm just saying, it's just fascinating. Even
that Steven Seagal movie, there's some Steven Seagal movie, and it was going.
It's major money. It's like, it's like a difference of like $10-15 million.
It's the currency. It has to do with the currency exchange, and then the actual labor, how much they're paying people there. It's like,
it's fascinating.
I'm surprised they probably don't shoot a lot. Well, they probably, I don't know what the ratio is. I would think that they would shoot a lot of stuff in Philippines, because I mean, you got a big workforce there. But yeah, it really depends, because like I said, even that Steven Seagal movie, I remember reading about Half Past Dead. I think it was supposed to be set in Alcatraz, and I think they shot most of that in like either Poland or some other country, like for all the interiors, just because I think it was cheaper. So I'm just saying, like a lot of these, don't quote me, it might have been another Eastern European country, but they were specifically. That's been going on just to save money, with the labor force, the tax incentives, or for whatever reason. If you can cheat stuff and make, the interiors look like any interior, obviously that's easier. And then all you got to do is shoot the exteriors, or you get that footage and then just add that in the film. So, I mean, it makes sense. Yeah, I mean, this is how you make shooting in the United States more affordable. At least in Georgia and some of these other states.
I will say this, though, there is one thing that they do bring up in the story that I also find, fascinating, and that's just the idea of what they talk about of how the credits are allocated, because they have one component in the story.
The fraud part, yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah,
fraud. Well,
where
that's a
some
big
of the
issue
stuff
too.
might not be eligible
That's the
under the
problem.
tax
Yeah.
credit. So like it needs to there may be a need to have it audited, and if that's the case, maybe this amount that this figure is going to be far smaller than it normally would. So because they included in the story in Variety that the spokesperson for the Georgia Department of Economic Development, Miss Marie Gordon, she was cautioning, just that idea of the total credit allocation would likely be reduced because certain expenditures wouldn't be qualified. So, going forward, I'm very fascinated to see, how that will continue, or if maybe if the figure gets higher or if it gets lower, or additionally, if, just like you were saying, some of the other states kind of put their put themselves in, throw their hat into that ring, and try to see if they can raise their number in order to help improve the state of their respective economies as well, because there are some great advantages of that, just as you were mentioning, of bringing tourism into that state, and also bringing a huge, not only providing work for those that are working in that state, but also bringing in other folks in to drive the economy as well. So
And also, I would say another thing is, I mean, we did touch on this a little bit in one of the previous episodes about the auditing of these funds allocated, and what's it called? Yeah, I remember one of the stories. It's like one of the stories was, it's like a production company, like how it would work was like some of these production companies, they're based in LA or some other state, but then they're saying that they're based somewhere, like in Georgia, or they're making sure everything's in Georgia, but then all the money isn't being spent in Georgia. And it's like, yeah, I would think if you're going to get this tax credit and you're supposed to be helping the economy in that state, like you should be following the rules. And I have no problem if they got to enforce this and be like, hey, you guys are not doing what you're supposed to do. Then, as long as you have the right safeguards, or you enforce how it's supposed to be doled out, then yeah, I mean, that should be fine. But yeah, I mean, almost anytime you're giving away incentives and stuff, there's always like people trying to take advantage, and it's like, it's sad, but that's how it is. But I find it fascinating that also in the article it says that it's more than like some of the Canadian tax credits, because I mean, Canada, they definitely support their filmmakers by giving them these grants and stuff, and like I'm like, man, we don't get those type of things like for upcoming filmmakers, because I know some people from Canada who are like emerging filmmakers, and they talk about these programs, and it's like, I'm like, wow, I wish we had some more of those. Because they said that those governments allocated $819 million Canadian dollars in credits in the year ending March 31st, 2020, or about $650 million in US dollars, and that's still significant for Canada. But yeah, Georgia, they're surpassing them. So yeah, that's definitely what's going to happen. Oh yeah, and then I would say lastly, another thing is, this also gives this also makes it difficult for people who might have an issue with like because that's another thing, like some states, they have certain laws that people might not agree with, and then I know that there was controversy also for some time in Georgia about one of their laws, and some people are trying to pull out, but then it makes you wonder, like, hey, how much, if you're going to impact a state and a large part of their economic activity, and maybe don't agree with maybe some of the laws there, just by you pulling out your business, is that going to impact maybe some of the laws that are made there? And I think it was from one of that Will Smith movie that he was shooting with Antoine Fuqua. It's called Emancipation. Like I think they pulled out of Georgia and they went to Louisiana because of one of the laws. I think it was like, well, we're not going to get into politics and stuff, but anyway, I'll just say one of the laws that they were changing. And that's another thing states have to consider. It's like, hey, if you're going to incentivize people to come here, they're going to cut, a lot of people want to save money, but also like, you don't want to piss those people off if they're bringing all this money to your state. If another state can give similar incentives and they don't have an issue with whatever type of legislation trying to pass that maybe they don't agree with. So it just shows you got to also be careful with how you try to operate in your state, even if you're going to give people incentives. But
Indeed.
I will just say, I'm glad that a state outside of California has done this, and I hope others follow suit, because if you want more filmmaking activity and more movies shot outside of Hollywood and bring more opportunities to people who are, like I said, maybe aren't staying in LA, you have to do this more to incentivize filmmakers to want to shoot their movies out there. And I don't care what anybody's saying, like, hey, if you're going to give a tax incentive or credit, it's going to be attractive regardless. It's just like with Amazon or these other companies who were, I know there's controversy with that when they were bringing their offices over to New York and DC, and then they left New York. They said, forget New York, we're just going to be in was it Crystal City area of Virginia. And guess what? Virginia, they're going to benefit from, Amazon bringing over a somewhat of a second headquarters. But
indeed,
that's what happens. Anyway.
All right, so on to our next story. So that will wrap up, I guess you could say, our Netflix.
Now we're chilling. That was Netflix. Now we're chilling.
But yeah, as I said, so Don Cheadle and Steven Soderbergh, as you can see in the story there, are developing a series centered around Wall Street's first Black millionaire. And to get more specific, a story out of Variety, the series will be called The Other Hamilton. It's going to tell the story of Jeremiah Hamilton, a Haitian immigrant turned Wall Street tycoon in the 1800s who became one of the first Black millionaires using questionable, often illegal methods. And he did this by scamming insurance companies and capitalizing on others' losses. He earned the moniker the Prince of Darkness, which is actually the name of the book of the same name, which is called Prince of Darkness, The Untold Story of Jeremiah G. Hamilton, Wall Street's first Black millionaire, written by Shaun White. So, Jerome, you hear this news about this story and, the parties involved, as I said, Don Cheadle, Steven Soderbergh, their body of work in terms of what they've done thus far, obviously in their careers, and for them to take on this project. Tell me, share your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that author it says Shane White. I think
Shane White.
Just to make sure we're saying it right.
Shane White. Apologies. Yes, Shane White.
That's all good. Yeah, I just thought this was interesting because the concept seemed pretty unique. I didn't even know about this actual person and what he did, and it's kind of interesting because this is in the 1800s, so that's amazing. Now, obviously, it's saying this guy made money, became a millionaire from using questionable, often illegal methods. But I'm like, come on, for that time period. If you're Black in that time period, everything. I'm not saying it's exactly the same now, but I'm saying like there's a lot of illegal things happening to you if you're for being Black. So I don't know if you can really, not understand where this guy's come from, but whatever. The whole point of this guy actually becoming a millionaire in that time period, and then even if you use questionable methods, it just sounds like an interesting story. And that he's Haitian too, he's from the Caribbean. So I thought that was interesting. But the fact that Don Cheadle and Steven Soderbergh, who like I said, like you were saying, their work speaks for themselves. Come on, Out of Sight, Traffic, the Ocean's 11 films, the Ocean's films, and yeah. Oh, he worked on that. Okay, I didn't know Soderbergh was on that one, but anyway,
not Soderbergh.
I'm saying like their collaboration specifically. Sure. They've worked on so many films together. This should be a real. Just by the names attached, it should be a great TV show. And like I said, HBO Max, like I said, even if you don't like everything on HBO Max, they don't really make bad stuff, really. Even the stuff that's not as good, maybe it's still quality. So, maybe you might not like the topic or something, but their quality is pretty consistent. So I think, I think this should probably be a good show to look out for. And I guess if I don't know, they just says, I don't know if it's going to be, well, it sounds like it's actual series. Maybe, I don't know if it's going to be a limited series. Does it say limited? No, it looks like it's just
Yeah, they don't go into more specifics other than just talking about, developing into a series. I'm sure as we get closer to it, they may get into more specifics of whether it be limited or not. But just based off of, just the subject matter, it seems like you would have enough there to mine from to have it, last for multiple seasons. So, showing that meteoric, rise of that character, just like they have. I know we were just talking about Narcos, showing the rise of that character, the things that they had to go through to get to the position that they eventually get to, and then more than likely, their fall as well. And what they have to go through as a result of that fall. So
I also think it's relevant too, because the idea of the idea of scamming insurance companies. And I mean, I'm wondering if maybe because enough time has passed, but with 2008, the whole idea of people are like, oh man, AIG need to get bailed out. So the idea of in recent times that Wall Street had to get bailed out and these big insurance companies, and it's but the people got a lot of these new homeowners or whatever, people got screwed for buying houses that they can afford or whatever reason, they didn't get a bailout. Really, there really wasn't that. So I could see some people, just the appetite to be like, oh, this would be interesting. How, someone back then kind of stuck into the system and obviously must have gotten away for it for some time. But I just think that's kind of interesting. To me, it's just a time period to actually do that. I just think it's kind of interesting because
I agree.
Some of these old period pieces, I'd never some of these stories I just never heard. I'm glad that they're highlighting some of this stuff.
And I was going to say a good example of
that you get. Yeah,
I was going to say a good example of that. I mean, I know offline we were talking about Lovecraft Country and how that's a period piece too, and it's exactly. Very it's always visually, it's always interesting to see to journey back to a different time, whether it's how people were dressed around that time, how people interacted in that time, maybe even the slang during that time. People speak a different way now than they did then, and maybe there were some phrases or some vernacular that was different at that time, obviously, probably to make it as accurate as possible. There are going to be some uglier aspects that we're probably going to see in terms of that vernacular. I won't go into specifics, but you understand what I mean. But even outside of that, just the general vernacular of how people interacted or how they talked with each other. It's always interesting when you're talking about, period pieces. So, yeah.
And I will say I'm always interested. I'm not even the biggest fan of all period pieces, but I will say I like seeing more period pieces that are in this country, or maybe that are highlighting if it's African Americans, or maybe I'd like to also see just stuff about what about a mixed person back in the day, or maybe you just don't see a variety of everything that happened back in the day. It's usually a lot. I know some people probably hate on what I'm going to say, but I'm not as interested in all the British stuff. I know my mom's a big fan, but some of that stuff's interesting, but I'm just come on, let's mix it up. It's not everything and not every period piece has to be a British, something that focus on what happened back in the day in Great Britain, or or maybe Irish people or Italian. Which is cool. If the story's good, the story's good. But I'm we also got. I feel diversity doesn't have to be contemporary. It can also be what happened back then. How were people from a different culture, if they're Black, they're Hispanic, Asian, India, whatever, how were they interacting with society? How was seeing stuff from their eyes? And in a unique story like this, wow, becoming a millionaire, to me, what are those unique stories that we're not seeing? To me, that's the type of stuff I'm okay, cool, wow, this is interesting. I've never heard about this, and it's a little different. So yeah, I'm excited to see how this is going to turn out. So we'll have to see when it comes out.
Indeed. And that brings us to our final story, which you probably saw in the title for this week in review. And that's basically centered around the two franchises. So I guess you could say technically one franchise and literally the other franchise. So the director of Spider-Man No Way Home, John Watts. Um, he will be acting as a producer for the next installment of the Final Destination franchise. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with the Final Destination franchises, if you guys, I'm a huge a horror buff, and I love my horror movies. And if you checked out the top 10 films that I recommended to watch for Halloween that I did with another team member of our team, Josh, who's himself a horror buff. Final Destination, you'll know, was in that top 10 for me. It was a franchise that has started.
What number for you?
I'm trying to remember. I want to say, I would have to look back. I want to say I had it, I want to say within the 6 to 10 range. Don't quote me on what the exact number was, but it was within that bottom 5. But the reason being is that and I'll look back. I don't recall. I'll take a look at it, and I can let you know after you share your thoughts. But it's like one of my favorite franchises. It started within the first decade of the new millennium, and it basically, if you guys aren't, for the few of you that may not be familiar with it, because I feel like it's a franchise that even maybe if you haven't seen it, you still are aware of it. It basically has that story of, a group of young people who, escape a horrible death in the first portion of the film, whatever that installment is. And they find themselves dying over the course of the rest of the film due to, a series of increasingly elaborate accidents. And these elaborate accidents are due to, death coming after them in creative ways, because they were supposed to initially die in the major accident that sends the entire story into hyperdrive. So it was friend to the show, shout out to Jeffrey Reddick. What's up, Jeff? Shout out to him. He created the idea for this franchise, and as I said, it is continue doing, and with this film, it's going to be the 6th installment. So there have been 5 so far. It's crazy that it's because I remember when the franchise started that it's had that longevity. But as I said, in terms of the concept of it, it's quite a nice change of pace of what you normally would have with the boogeyman, so to speak, of having a monster after you, because you have something that you can't really, fight on a physical level, and having something that is, more spiritual, and having, death after you versus like some physical monster that you can, run away from. So, Jerome, you hear this, you have the director of right now the biggest movie of the year, now even one of the biggest movies of all time, taking on, from what I understand, according to the story, he's not only going to be acting as a producer, but he's also going to be having a hand in the story as well. And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I gotta preface it by saying, like, I haven't seen the Final Destination film, so I really need to catch up and watch it. But the concept sounds interesting. I always wanted to check them out. But no, I just think it's interesting. It's just an interesting choice. It just shows, I feel like John Watts must really be a fan of the franchise, because I feel like usually it's the other way around. Like, maybe you're like part of like a franchise that's still successful, or like films that are decently successful, but then you take a leap to an even bigger franchise. It's kind of interesting seeing someone who's like, I mean, the Spider-Man, like I said, that was like the biggest movie last year, Spider-Man No Way Home, and like you were saying, it's like one of the most successful films now of all time, domestically and, I mean, internationally. It just keeps moving up the list, but it just shows he's probably just a really hardcore fan of this franchise, and I think that's really cool. I mean, seeing that, and I think it's also good for him as a filmmaker. I mean, even if he's not directing, if he's just producing, to diversify and not just do the same, just be known for doing superhero films now, at least. I mean, because he's supposed to be doing the Fantastic Four films too, which I think is interesting, but at the same time, because I don't think I mean, because obviously, usually the standard is Marvel gives like every character or franchise like at least 3 movies. Now, would he be directing all 3 of those too? I mean, that's a lot of Marvel films to be directing, especially taking them all on. But who knows? I mean, maybe he's just gonna do first one. I don't know, but I just think I think it's always healthy and it's good for any filmmaker to just obviously you direct and write and direct stuff that but and that you like, but also like stretch your muscles, like try to do something different, because I mean, at least from my standpoint, I don't want to just be known as the guy who just does one type of movie or one type of show. And the thing is, the industry is really quick to pigeonhole you once you have one successful film. I'm sure he's getting tons of offers to do similar types of films like Spider-Man or other comic book movies. I mean, obviously, like we said, Fantastic Four, but besides that, I bet you other studios are probably giving him offers for other movies that are similar, like
for sure,
in that style, with that genre. So, yeah, I mean, like if he can pull off, it'd be interesting to see him direct something. Like I said, maybe it's a horror film, or I don't know, just do something a little bit that people aren't expecting, just to show that like, hey, you have skills in other areas as a filmmaker.
Absolutely, and I'll comment
versatility,
further. I'll comment further on what you said is, just that idea of, doing a trilogy of superhero films. And I feel like the idea of doing Fantastic Four is an interesting move because it allows you to kind of have to refresh your creative mind, so to speak, because, even though you still are in the House of Mouse and you're still in the MCU, so to speak, of doing films in that universe, you're still given the opportunity to bring those creative talents to something else versus, kind of getting kind of stagnant doing one character. So, the fact that you're able to hop into something else and to put your own stamp on it, I feel will provide enough of a nice challenge where you're given an opportunity to kind of spread your wings a little bit creatively in doing, a different group of superheroes. So I'll say it about that. And then additionally, what I find interesting in this story is I'll never forget, and you guys can check out, I want to say he commented on it in our in the interview years ago, but maybe it was offline. Also, is shout out to Ed Sanchez. So Ed Sanchez, co-director of Blair Witch. If you guys aren't familiar, directs many more things. Directs, Supernatural, Dusk Till Dawn, those series. Supernatural, it's off now. The series is gone, but he directed a great share of them. And he commented on, after he did the Blair Witch Project, he said that he went through what he called a victory lap of sorts, where after everyone, after that film came out, he was getting offers everywhere to do all types of things. And, and talking about what you were saying, Jerome, of him saying of John Watts being a fan of the material. It's specified even in the article that him and his wife, who's also his producing partner, Diane, they're both massive fans of that franchise and they've been fans since the beginning. So it's kind of like in those situations where, maybe at one point when, no one knew who you were and you didn't really have that name to go by yet, that there were a lot of projects that perhaps, you wanted to always be a part of at some point. And now that you have the opportunity and you're starting to now have that name to be able to do it, you can actually, look at it and say, oh, you know what? I love that franchise. I grew up on that. I want to do that. Or I want to have my hand in this, or I want to have my hand in that. I want to be able to write this. I want to be able to produce this. So,
or like Chris Rock producing Spiral.
Right. Exactly.
I want to be in the
for better or for worse, right? For better or for worse. It was all right. For better or for worse. But I feel like that's what this is a situation of, where, Pete, like to your point, you were saying, well, he's doing a Spider-Man movie, and you would think that he's doing, all these other, big tentpole superhero films. But, if you're fans of other franchises as well, other horror franchises, other, science fiction franchises. And I would argue as well, and you guys can fight me on it, I don't care. Like, you could argue that out of, in terms of modern franchises, that like Final Destination is in I want to say in the last 30 years or so, it's right up there among, horror franchises in terms of, its longevity and how those installments play, and its impact, I feel, on pop culture. So yeah, that those are just my thoughts. That's my opinion.
I mean, you have it in the sixth movie, obviously.
It's doing something, right? It's doing something.
But that's not always a good thing, because when you look at some franchises continue because the movies are so cheap to make, like Saw.
Yeah. But I will also say this. I realized that I did not bring up this point, that for this installment, that it will be making its way on HBO Max versus theatrically. Now, that's what it is as it stands. It could very well change. We hear news change all the time, where we hear films, change back and forth in terms of how it will be released. But at least as it stands now, it will release on HBO Max. But Jerome, do you have any other final thoughts before we wrap up here and talking about Final Destination? I know you said you haven't watched it yet, and it's still.
I need to watch the movies first to really make. I mean, the concept sounds good. Yeah, I mean, like I said, we were talking to Jeffrey in LA, so I mean, my duty. I got to watch it. But no, I mean, I think the concept's pretty cool. I mean, and like I said, they have 6 films. I mean, you say it's pretty good. I got to at least check out the first few and see how it is. But I just think it's interesting, to see what people are passionate about outside of what maybe they're known for. And I'll give you one other example. I think that's a little bit earlier. I mean, you could make the same argument somewhat for you could for like Ryan Coogler. I mean, he did well. His first film, Fruitvale Station, did well enough, but he wasn't like super well known. But he really loved the Rocky franchises, and he took his script to Stallone or whatever, and then they did Creed, and then now look, you got a new add on to Stallone, and then look now, and same with Black Panther. He obviously now he's
and he even says
he's mixing it up though. He's mixing up with these different types of films that he's producing though. So I give him credit for it. He's kind of like really navigating it well.
I'll comment further. Like, I remember, I'll never forget when he did a panel for the first Black Panther film. This was this 2017? Yeah,
Comic-Con.
Yeah.
No, I think he did a little early, but then they showed footage. Oh yeah, wait. 2017.
Yeah, because it came out in 2018.
But I think they did a panel even before that. But then they showed footage at the one on 2017.
Well, whatever panel it was, maybe it was following Black Panther, and they were, getting ready for Infinity War. I'll have to look back, but the point is, what I remember him saying is, during one of those panels, he remembered going to Comic-Con and being out there in the audience.
Yeah, in the back. Yeah.
He said, I remember being way, way back there in the nosebleeds, like way, way back in the back, in the very last aisle. And look at me, look at where I am now. Like, I'm here up front talking about a Marvel film. So, those things like that happen. Things come full circle like that, where, you keep working at it, you keep working at your craft, and, at some point, you get that recognition, and people recognize your work. And once that happens, you have that opportunity to come full circle with a lot of those IPs that you enjoyed, and potentially, who knows, down the line, you may eventually find yourself being a part of it at some point. So, yeah.
And creating your own stuff. I think that's just as important.
Indeed.
I think it's more important, but yes.
Indeed.
Do what you gotta do. But there's a lot of stuff. I ain't gonna lie. There's a lot of stuff in Marvel. There's a few characters I would love to make a film about, but
there would be a few that I love to be.
But the thing is, I don't like relying on. I will be honest. I don't like the whole idea of just trying to rely on that. Like, I'd rather also like try to bring something different. But it's good to. I mean, yeah, if you're a fan, you're a fan. We were all fans first, regardless. Like, hey.
That's so awesome to be able to add your stamp to that tapestry of that franchise if you have the opportunity to.
Exactly. So, of course.
Good on you. All right. So that's going to wrap up this episode of This Week in Review. Now, before I go, I'll pass it over, of course, to my fellow co-hosts. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for joining us. I know, this is probably a little longer than we've usually had, but anyway. You can you can like and follow me on Instagram at JWBourgeois21 right here. Also that's Instagram and Twitter. You can also follow us on our Instagram for Movers Shakers Unlimited. So that's at Movers Shakers Unlimited. Also, we're on Twitter and Facebook at Move and Shake UNLTD. That's right here, Move and Shake UNLTD. And if you want to support us on Patreon, like Brandon said earlier, go to patreon.com/Movers Shakers Unlimited. Like I said, spread the word, share, like, follow. Just and let us also know about what you guys want us to talk about. I mean, we have the live chat. You can email us. Just put a comment on our YouTube videos. And definitely let us know what you want us to talk about. We love talking about these different topics. We do it anyway, like we said, and we love going to these events. And this, like we've already mentioned, we're gonna. Well, as long as the events at the Super Bowl are still happening, who knows?
Right. Right.
We're gonna be in LA, and there's some other ones happening too. There's stuff in DC too that we might, you guys might you'll hear from. So. We're gonna keep bringing you this content, and like I said, let us know if there's anything specifically you guys want us to also cover and touch on, and we'll add it to the roster of info. So I'll send it back to you, man.
Cool. So yes, once again, I'm your host, Brandon Choi, host and co-creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. You can find me at Brandon Choi ENT, which you see down below for Twitter, and then Brandon Choi _ENT on Instagram. As Jerome had mentioned, we do have some, awesome shows that are on tap. Don't forget that we do also have a lot of our series that we do our talkbacks or our discussions on. So right now we're on a small hiatus with Rediscovering the Federation. So the Star Trek talkback, because the show, is on a mid-season break. So we will be back in that next month. But we do still have The Expanse going. So that's on the Juice, OTJ, the Expanse discussion that we have, that happens on Sunday. So that will be happening tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, with our awesome host Matt Neslonic, as well as Michael Pia. So make sure that you are around for that. It'll be right here on our YouTube channel live, so you can enjoy it live. And since it will be a spoiler episode, you can enjoy it. Hopefully you are enjoying it after you've already watched the episode. So make sure, you check that out and share your thoughts, because, we always enjoy having live thoughts from listeners and watchers. But outside of that, we do have a couple of other events, and there are even some that we were even talking about online. Jerome and I were talking online that, could be on tap as well. But once that's confirmed, we'll make sure that we will announce it to you, of course. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. Be safe out there, and see you soon. Peace.
Peace out.